Well, welcome back. I'm now joined by Dr. Tracy Packiam for Mental Health Monday, something we're going to start, and I'm very excited about it because this is so important. So today we're discussing grief, and unfortunately that is something that pretty much everyone has to encounter at some point in their lives in any way, shape, or form. So when dealing with grief, what is this? There was a study published in 2018 that found that one method is less effective at dealing with it, and that's avoidance.
It is, and in fact researchers call it avoidant grief, and they did something very unique in this particular study. So moving beyond just interviews, they looked at what's happening in the brain, and typically with grief or sadness we're activating the emotional center of the brain. But when we work with avoidant grief, it's activating all parts of the brain, because we are not only trying to avoid the emotion, we're trying to avoid an environment, stimuli, objects, anything around us that can trigger or remind us of that grief. And eventually it can become so exhausting and we're so overwhelmed.
Yeah, so why is that less effective in the long run?
It's less effective because think of it like a pop-up blocker. You're constantly having that up, and eventually it's mentally exhausting, it's emotionally exhausting, because not only are you dealing with the loss of someone, you're constantly trying to reshape your environment around you. You're thinking, does that coffee remind me of that person? Does this outfit remind me of that person? Does this song remind me? So you're constantly on high alert trying to create an avoidance technique, and it's wearying, and it leaves you very little energy for other things, simply for living. And you often find fatigue accompanies that kind of avoidant grief.
Yes, and would you say that, I mean, obviously, if we hear a song, that happens to me all the time, is it better to just listen to it and feel the emotion with it, or to turn the channel?
Yes, and that's certainly one school of therapy, this idea that you sit with your emotion. And I'll say this to my clients too as a licensed psychologist: set a timer. If you do feel sad, rather than trying to push that emotion down, if you have the space and the ability to do that, put your phone on for 5 minutes, play that song, allow yourself to feel that grief, and that's part of the acceptance process. So sometimes avoidant grief says, you know, I don't want to feel this emotion because it hurts, and so I want to push everything away, not just reminders, but even my own pain. And sometimes that song, that's part of that acceptance, and it's the first step to healing.
Right. I mean, with my father, he died by suicide 16 years ago, and it was the worst thing I've ever dealt with, and I don't want to cry. But I did push it away. I pushed it and pushed it for so many years, and I didn't even get therapy until 2019, and it changed my life. But there are other people in my family who did not do that, and they are still dealing with it 16 years later like it was fresh, like pulling off a Band-Aid. And this is something that after a while becomes subconscious, right? You don't even realize.
We don't, and I think one of the things to recognize is that our brains are wired differently from that connection with our person, that loved person, and that oxytocin. And so to try to just feel like nothing has happened is unrealistic. So recognition is part of that healing process, that your brain is different, and it's okay. And how can we begin that journey? And one way to do that is to begin to try to find meaning in the now. Our brains are wired in such a way that we do look for meaning. That's part of the process. But sometimes we look for meaning for why did that happen, especially when it's unexpected. And that can get us so focused into the past that we're not able to move on and deal with it in the present. So looking for meaning today, so listening to a song could be, today I find meaning in that the song reminds me of my loved one, and how can I create this moment where it's meaningful. And so shifting that focus, that search for meaning from why did this happen to how can I find value in that memory, that connection that I have with that
it's a lot easier now for me to say, all right, Dad, say it with me. You know, like I can be light about it, but at first I would be changing because it would be too raw. So if somebody needs some more information on this or resources, where can they go?
There are a lot of national mental health websites that they can reach out to. If you have insurance, look for an insurance provider that deals with the grief and trauma loss like that. There are also a lot of online websites. So if you're not comfortable being in person, a lot of telehealth resources that you know, adapt to any kind of insurance needs and so on. So help is there where you don't even have to leave the house in the beginning.
Isn't that nice? Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Sorry I got a little emotional, but you know, we're all dealing with it in some way or another. So thank you again.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back.